Yeah, I think I'll start up. So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the first of our fall workshops for the Transformations Community of Practice. So I'm Bruce Goldstein. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Colorado Boulder in environmental design and environmental studies. And I'm also director of the NetWeaver Network, which is a learning community for transformative change making. Like so many of you, I have a lot of hats in the transformative space. So I'm coordinating the Transformations Community of Practice and working with Ashley Lane, who is graduating from CU Boulder's MENV, or Masters of the Environment program later this year, studying food systems. The Transformations Community of Practice is an effort to continue to build our community of transformations practitioners and academics and pracademics, which has held conferences over the last 8 years in Oslo and Stockholm and Dundee and Santiago. So we were going to meet next year in Barcelona, which would have been a lot of fun. But like all of you, we've adapted since the pandemic began. So we're holding virtual events like this one in association with Future Earth. So we're going to announce that virtual event, which is sort of conference scale, in the next few months, and that's going to be held in 2021. We'll send you more information about that soon. And of course, we're posting all information about these workshops as well as this big virtual event to our webpage, which I just threw into chat. And so we also, on that webpage, we also have a transformation arts page and a page of our organizational partners. So if any of you or your organizations would like to be a recognized partner to the transformations community, please drop us an email. We'd be delighted to get your logo and a link to your organization on our page. So the Transformations Community Practice is sponsoring other workshops during the remainder of this year and in 2020, 2021. And we haven't decided what our program is going to look like yet, and we want to collaborate with you on that. So if you have some ideas or something you'd like to share with the community, please email us, and we'd love to collaborate with you. So our first workshop today is being presented by Laura Pereira, who is a scientist. She's based at the Center for Food Policy at City University London and the Stockholm Resilience Center. So Laura is going to be sharing a future thinking technique based on the Manoa mashup method. And so welcome, Laura. Thanks for offering this.
Cool, thanks, Bruce. And good to be here with you all online. And as I said earlier, it's really great to see some familiar faces in the ranks. So as Bruce has mentioned, we're all learning how to adapt to this new online world, particularly those of us who are very used to facilitating in person and really getting groups together and being able to really talk through some issues and use post-it notes and sticky notes sort of quite liberally. We're moving to the online method. And so what I'm going to do today is present a workshop that I actually presented at the Dundee conference in 2015, but it's been adapted for online participation using the really great software Mural. And so we also have some amazing students who are going to be the facilitators in each of the different groups. So basically the outline for the session today is I'm going to do a brief introduction using just to the background in the SEEDS project and sort of how we were actually going about developing this method and how it's been applied. And then also just present the 4 steps that we're going to be exercising during the breakout groups. And then Ashley's going to put you all into breakout groups with the student facilitators. And you're just going to learn the. Sorry, I took the liberty of unmuting myself from that. And yeah, so we're going to just going to learn the method. So in essence, we're less interested in the content of the of what you're going to be discussing in the groups, and more just interested in how you would go about doing this. Obviously, doing this in 2 hours, in a 2-hour session, is enough to get to learn the method. But I've done this everything from an afternoon through to 2 to 3 days. So we won't get the depth of conversation necessarily as much as we would potentially like within the groups, but we'll definitely be able to see what the method holds and how it can maybe even be adapted to your different needs. So I'm going to share my screen, and as with these things, always hope that it works. That is my screen, and I will not admit that person. I will go to, right. And Bruce, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen and everything's going? Fantastic. Okay, so the session today is on imagining better futures using the SEEDS approach in an adaptive Manoa method. And as I'm sure you're aware, well, there's some background reading to this whole process paper that we wrote. There's a strong futures tradition drawing from the Hawaii School and Wendy Schultz in particular, who adapted the Manoa method using sort of horizon scanning. And this general approach is something that we've adapted in the SEEDS project. So I'm going to give some background actually to that project rather than to the history of the method itself. And of course, the ambulance is coming past right now, but hopefully it's not too irritating. So in essence, we're finding ourselves at a time in this age of the Anthropocene, sort of where humans are this dominant force on the planet, where we're confronted by everything from long-term concerns around climate change, short-term concerns about global pandemics, biodiversity loss, all of these stories of futures that it's kind of difficult to navigate away from, and to think about what potentially positive stories we could actually be telling about the future. And that's largely the point of the SEEDS project, is really to be able to engage our imagination. This is an image from Steven Stalberg from a work that Andrew Merry did for his PhD on radical ocean futures, which really was pushing the boundary in how we could think about different futures and open up scenarios and storytelling as a particular technique to really engage people in thinking differently about the future. So when we start imagining these futures, it can be really difficult to get out of our day-to-day, sort of the mundane, sort of the concerns that we have in the present. And so we really need to be developing or thinking about futures tools, techniques, and methods that can really get participants to get out of their daily concerns and to really move into thinking very creatively and imaginatively about futures. And as I said, this is because sort of in our day-to-day, this notion of the Anthropocene really confronts us with a lot of doom and gloom. We're thinking about like climate change, sort of Arctic sea ice breaking down, sort of all the way through to polar bears losing their habitats, and all of these really, really sad and difficult stories that we're telling ourselves at the moment in the world. And COVID-19, I think, has just added an even more intense sort of layer to that. And so you also start to see a lot of the literature and the stories around us, everything from Mad Max, Fury Road, through to sort of even going back in the day to the Limits to Growth report, which was really about how wrong things are going. And so sort of I like to use this quote by Lao Tzu, which I think really talks about the idea of transformations or transformative change, but in a very different sort of real way, where he says, if you don't change direction, you may end up where you're heading. And I think right now we're heading towards these very difficult and problematic stories that we're telling ourselves, everything from a global level down to sort of very local and regional discussions. And so how can we train our brains to think about changing direction and what that might actually look like, and the actions we can take in the present to be able to guide ourselves and navigate towards those more desirable futures that we actually hold within us. And so the Seeds of Good Anthropocenes project was thinking about this idea of transformation and looked at historical precedents. So if you think about the kinds of change that happened within Europe, sort of shifting from the sort of medieval Europe through the Renaissance and to the Industrial Revolution, it would have been really, really difficult to be a peasant on a medieval farm and actually conceptualize the kinds of change that society would have undergone to find ourselves in the sort of industrial revolution. And arguably, it's a similar kind of level of transformative change that we're having to envision when we think about sustainability futures. Also, when we think about these more desirable futures that we actually want to navigate towards. But the idea is that as radical as that change is, the seeds of those futures, the seeds of the Industrial Revolution, was present within medieval Europe and sort of the global world at that time. And so the seeds of a more sustainable future is also present in our world right now. And so our idea with the Seeds Project is to really see if we can identify what some of those seeds of change are, what some of the seeds of potentially really interesting and radical change that we think is hopeful, what they are, and see if we can build up different visions from that base. So the idea really is to find these seeds and to see how they will grow into a garden or a forest of sort of really, really different, more positive futures. And so when we say seed, this can also mean all sorts of different things. But we define it in the project as a way of thinking or doing. It can be a technology or even an institution. So it's a really broad idea, but it needs to exist, at least in prototype form. So it can't be something that we think it would be really nice to have in the future. We do actually need to be seeing it playing out, at least in prototype form, in the world right now. And it also can't be dominant or mainstream. It needs to be marginal. It can't be the main way that we go about doing things at the moment, because that kind of sits at the heart of what we think about as transformative change, sort of as breaking from the current business as usual way of doing things. And that according to someone, and this is where sort of plurality and diversity starts to come in, this seed needs to contribute to creating a more sustainable future. So we've been collecting a lot of these from around the world on our website, but 3 examples are just sitting there at the bottom. The one is urban river resurfacing in Korea, which is quite a technological but also ecological kind of seed that some people could find problematic, but some think is a really important way to think about river conservation. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault is another controversial example of the need to conserve our biodiversity, but to actually store it within place so that we have access to it, considering the rates of loss that we're experiencing at the moment. And then on the right-hand side, you see Trees for Life, which is sort of a rewilding project in Scotland, which is really about sort of bringing people together to preserve the forest in Scotland. So another very different way of thinking about change in the future. But you can see how each of these seeds could lead to very different kinds of futures with different components in them. And that's largely what we're going to be exploring today in this adapted Manoa mashup process. So we ran this session first in Southern Africa, actually, and there's a video that I've got for when we come back into plenary at the end, if we have some time, to show you about the scenarios that we actually generated from this process. But in essence, we started with a set of seeds that you can see in the left-hand sort of corner of this figure, and sort of talked about this transition into these 4 really radically different futures. Post-Exodus, Demos 42, Ubuntu say. So that's where this method was first trialed and tested. And since then, it's been taken up in a variety of different processes, both for the Global Environment Outlook, which is UN Environment, as well as for IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And unfortunately, I have to say that in full every time I do this presentation. But it's basically, it's largely been said to be the IPCC for biodiversity. That's not strictly true, but that's largely the role that it plays. And this is actually an image from a visioning workshop we did in Auckland, sort of based on the seed approach that we're going to be learning today. So basically, I'm just going to now take you through the step-by-step way of actually going about doing the Manoa mashup method, which is sort of based on this idea of using seeds to build really radically different kinds of futures. And then, yeah, we'll have maybe a very brief Q&A session, but then I think largely most of the work is going to be happening in your different facilitator groups, and your facilitators have been extremely well trained and know exactly what's happening, so they can they can answer most of your questions, but I'll also be in the main plenary room if there are any sort of further questions. And then we'll come back together at the end of the session. So there are a lot of people online at the moment, which is great. Means that not everyone will be able to sort of feedback individually, but hopefully we can still get a bit of a discussion going. Right, so the first step that you're going to go about in your groups is to choose 3 seeds. And we tend to see that 3 seeds is a useful way to get enough diversity, but it's still something that we can manage. And throughout the process, we're going to be using this idea of sort of the STEEP idea. It's also called PESTLE, of social, just thinking about potentially a seed that focuses on social issues. Maybe one could be technological or economic. We could also think about environmental or political. So sort of choose 3 different sort of areas for the kinds of seeds, and don't spend too much time on doing this. There is no wrong answer necessarily, but it's really just to have a good starting point. And again, when we've used this method, we've done it in a variety of different ways. When we did the Southern African seed workshop, we actually allocated the seeds to the groups. So we had 3 different seeds that we pre-configured to be quite interesting in terms of how we thought they would clash together. We've also gone through a process of this where we've asked the groups themselves to come up with their own seeds. It's a much more participatory process. It also allows the participants to understand a little bit more about what the seeds actually are. But it can take some time. So you'll be able to see those dynamics as you actually go through the process yourself. The second step is to build a future wheel. So what you do is you can see that yellow sticky or the blue trend or event that's in the middle. You'll sort of define the seed in its mature condition. So if it was no longer marginal, but it was actually the dominant way of doing things, kind of what would that look like? And then you start to sort of build the first outline of your wheel, which is the first order implications of that seed. So if you have the seed being very dominant, what does that mean for the political system, for example? Again, going back to the STEEP, what are the environmental implications of that seed? What are the legal or technological implications? And then the second layer of the wheel is in looking at the second order implications. So what are the implications of those previous implications? So this might sound a little bit strange or difficult right now, but I can assure you when you go through the process, it becomes a lot clearer. So a lot of the time I tend to say, just trust the process, and you will see what the results are at the other end. So that's the second step. We're going to build 2 future wheels. Some groups might be super fast and will also be able to build up their 3rd future wheel, but that's not sort of 100% necessary, just to understand the process. The third step is then to do a cross-impact matrix. So what we need to do now is we've got sort of these distinct stories that are building up based on the seeds, but the beauty, the real narrative starts to come together when we actually clash them together. And people think in different ways. So they're the linear thinkers that we use the cross-impact matrix to sort of help. And they sort of really like to think about what is the impact of this one seed on the other seed. They're in a very clear kind of matrix format. So that's what you can see here. We go back to the original seeds and we look at what their impact would be on each other and build up this matrix. And then we have the sort of the more loopy thinkers who sort of like connecting things with lines. And so that's going to be the final point that we actually do today, which is step 4, which is clashing the different future wheels or connecting them together. And this can be sort of finding points in one future wheel that sort of reinforces something that is merged in another future wheel, or it could be something that is a direct clash where things are completely different. And that's another thing that I wanted to say is, again, there are no wrong answers when we actually do this process. And so if there's a conflict within the group about what some of the implications are or how the seeds can clash together, we can note both of them down and just actually put both of those sticky notes down. So it's also not about creating tensions, it's about collecting as much as we can from the group's knowledge. And then what we won't be doing today, but which is the 5th step in the process, is actually charting some pathways. So once we've built up the seed, you start to sort of build up this vision of the future that is about sort of a positive idea of where we could be able to grow to, which is sort of this top right-hand corner of this 3 horizons diagram, which deserves a workshop in and of itself, but some of you may be familiar with it. And this idea of the pockets of the future and the present, or the bottom left-hand corner, are the seeds that we use to grow into this future. The first horizon is the present. It's about what's dominant. What is the dominant system that we largely need to have decrease in order for this new system to grow? And the second horizon is the clash in the middle. So that's how you can see us situating the this visioning process, the top right-hand corner, within a larger or a longer discussion about pathways of how to get there. And you can see that we use sticky notes in order to do this. This was from a previous workshop we did. And then I just really like this post. It was from the Wellbeing Economy, a tweet that sort of Catherine said that the revolution will not be on a post-it, but I think largely those of us who are involved in facilitating a lot of these workshops, that we quite often do think that the revolution will happen from a post-it, or at least being able to put sort of revolutionary ideas onto post-its and see how they'll emerge. So I think, yeah, when it comes to being a practitioner, academic or facilitator, these are just things we need to bear in mind when we actually really start talking about transformations. Okay, so this is the process. We're going to be breaking out into small groups, and I think Ashley is going to be in charge of that. All of your facilitators have these steps, but in essence, 10 minutes for brainstorming the seeds, 20 minutes for your first future wheel, 20 minutes for your second, and maybe a start on your third. We're then going to use a cross impact matrix for about 10 minutes, connect the future wheels together with sort of more sort of connecting loopy thinking tools for 10 minutes. And then it would be really great if the group has time to just discuss amongst themselves the kind of world, the kind of future that they see is starting to emerge from these discussions, which is what we would use to build that sort of that top right-hand corner of the 3 horizons. And then we'll all return to plenary just to have a brief feedback on the process, some concluding remarks, and then I'll hand over to Bruce to sort of bring everything to a close and introduce the subsequent workshops that are going to happen. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for now, because you don't necessarily need to see that anymore. And I think I'm going to hand over to Ashley. I guess if there are any burning questions, you could put it in put it in the chat. But as I said, the facilitators should be able to answer most of those for you.
We live in turbulent times and are surrounded by visions of dark and uncertain futures. Societies are changing, and people are transforming the environment, the entire planet, in unexpected ways. In many places, we are increasingly disconnected from nature and from each other. These are key symptoms of a new geological era, which scientists call the Anthropocene. But there is hope. There are seeds of positive futures all around us, seeds of good Anthropocenes. These seeds are projects, organizations, initiatives that are experimenting with doing things differently and making an impact for the better. Better for people and better for our planet. But for now, these seeds are small, local, and not part of the mainstream. What would happen if these seeds were to grow? If they became towering trees with interlocking networks of roots supporting and nourishing each other? What if these seeds became the way we do things, the way the world works? What would the future look like? This is what we asked a group of scientists, artists, and changemakers at a workshop in Cape Town in November 2016. Starting with 4 sets of very different seed projects and initiatives, we asked the participants to imagine what Southern Africa would be like if these seeds were to grow, combine, and become the new normal. We asked them to stretch their imaginations. We asked them to dig deep. As a result, the participants developed 4 radically alternative positive visions for the future. Although these visions differed in their details, they had many striking commonalities. All 4 futures are deeply shaped by technology. This technology is used in a way that enables people to connect to each other, to develop a shared understanding and empathy, rather than become isolated and distrustful. Technological advances also free people up from working just to pay bills. Instead, people work to contribute to their community, live fulfilling lives, and express themselves as human beings. In all four futures, power is highly decentralized, and people actively participate in decision-making. Societies are more equal and fair, and value the unique differences between people. Collaboration, rather than competition, is a core ethic. These values extend to humanity's relationship with the environment. Thoughtless exploitation of resources is replaced by responsible stewardship of nature, which is understood to belong to everyone. Most food and other goods are produced locally, minimizing transport and waste. Overconsumption is replaced by flourishing societies in which people respect ecological limits and each other. Idealistic? Yes. Impossibly utopian? No. These are our visions, and the seeds of these futures already exist. Let us nourish them, be inspired to plant more seeds, and let it grow into a beautiful new world.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry, that was just a little video from the Seeds Project as to welcome you all back as you were coming in from your rooms, because I know that can sometimes take some time. So it would be, I just wanted to sort of share this final quote on sort of stories are powerful things. They create our reality as much as they explain it. And I'm hoping that some of the stories that you started to tell each other during this process very much links into this idea of being able to conceptualize and imagine more positive futures. And hopefully given more time that you'd really be able to get into some nitty-gritty discussions. But it looked like everyone had a flurry of ideas and thoughts on that. So I just wanted to thank some of the team members that have been part of the Seeds project. And now I'm just going to hand it over to a general discussion, and we'll see how best to be able to do this in the sort of remaining 10 minutes or so before I hand back over to Bruce. Maybe everyone can, if you want to say something out loud, you can just raise your hand using the raise hand function. If you've just got a general comment that you'd like to make, please feel free to just put it into the chat, because people can also sort of react to that. And if no one starts to ask questions immediately, I will be a very typical lecturer, and I'll start calling on my students and asking them to respond. So please save them and put your hands up and come up with some comments about anything. It could be about the process. It can be something that struck you during the exercise, some things that may have been difficult. Okay, so David's asked how big the groups that work on seeds. Okay, David, maybe you want to ask your question out loud.
Yes, thanks. I was wondering if I would do this with 30 NGOs, for example, in my work in Southern Transylvania, how big the groups could be. Should they all work together, like 30 people, 30 organizations on 3 seats? Or should we divide them? What's the benefit of having more groups working on different seats of a region, or having all together working on some seats? I was just thinking of this.
Sure. So no, that's been a good idea. We've had seed workshops that have ranged from about 30 participants. I think that's kind of the smallest group that we've worked with, all the way through to in Auckland, the Visions workshop, we had about 80 participants. I think the core thing to consider is not how many people you can involve, but how many people you want really working together closely as a team. And I think that for that, the maximum number of people in a functioning group is probably around 8 or 9, though I would tend to say that 6 or 7 is actually the optimal for being able to allow enough people time to really engage and give their opinions and not to be clouded out by other people. And so from that, you can then see what the best option is, if you want them to sort of choose their own seeds, or if you want to sort of already lay them out. So you're already pre-configuring an idea of diversity in the kinds of visions that you're seeing. So you can look at differences and commonalities depending on the pathways. So, I mean, David, we can chat more about that, but in essence, the main rationale is that people in group activities tend to work best around 7 as the higher end. And after that, you can really do as much as you want. It comes down to how many facilitators you have to be in the groups. Thanks.
Maybe I can hijack that question. So what's the lower end like of the spectrum? Because we're planning a workshop and I think we're not going to have that many participants for the first round. So we're wondering how many groups.
So you don't need, you can have just one group of 6 to 7 people. That's also totally fine. I think just having 4 or 5 can be a little bit awkward. You don't really get enough of that kind of stimulation. But if you've got at least 6 or 7 people, then you just do one brainstorming like you guys did now in your breakout groups. You know, sometimes it's nice to at least have 2 groups so that they're able to discuss afterwards about similarities and things that they found difficult. But other than that, yeah, as long as you've got a good group, you're fine.
Yeah. Thanks.
Umar, looks like you had a question. Would you like to go?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for creating this wonderful dialogue space, and I learned a lot today. I was just wondering, and I had a look at your website as well, the one on Anthropocenes. What happens next is great. What next, and how can this particular website, how can that help in moving towards that particular future? Thank you.
So really good question. You bring David in here because he's also been collaborating with us. We've been quite constrained by getting funding actually to move things forward. So we've got funding for the website, and we're really trying to get some research associates or assistants in to help galvanize the collection of more of those seeds. We have that sort of contribute an idea place on there where we're trying to crowdsource as many ideas as possible. But I think the main rationale that we have is really to do more of these kinds of workshops, and then to see people who are excited by the process, who maybe want to take it into their environment, into their country or their organization, and help also generate some new ideas and take these kinds of tools and work with them. Because I think by generating more of this kind of activity, being able to tell of more of these stories, we'll be able to make that cognitive shift, hopefully.
Thank you very much for that answer. I just wanted one more question. We did some wonderful work on Miro. Is it possible to share some of that stuff? Because I would like to build on it and flesh it further. Is that possible?
So I think I'm going to hang on to that question and pass it on to Bruce, so that and then
yes.
maybe you can answer that. Yes. Okay. Fantastic. That's good. I just recognize that Michael also has his hand up, and I think that'll be the final question or comment that we'll take before I hand over to Bruce, and he'll be able to give a great summary on all of those logistics. Michael?
Thanks. Yeah, just a technical question on the future wheel. What kinds of things do you put on the inside versus on the outside? Because I think we mixed things up and it made the clashing matrices, the clashes not quite so clear. We ended up with a lot of very positive stuff and not enough of the negatives, which made me wonder.
Okay, no, for sure. So I mean, this method was designed to try and emphasize more of the positive against the negative. So sometimes we do also have negative implications, but the idea is to really be as creative as we can in terms of thinking about how positive implications could emerge. But then sort of the step that we haven't done here, which was the 3 horizons framework that I kind of alluded to in my presentation. That's where a lot of the reality, and I'm putting that in inverted commas, tends to come in about, okay, actually, but moving to these more positive futures can be quite difficult because we're sitting in a currently very constraining present. And that's where a lot of that reality and some of the potentially negative implications also start to open up, that in order for this to be a desirable pathway, a lot of things have to go right, and there can be a lot of capture or negative implications that emerge from there. And we've actually sort of experimented with coming up with some bifurcating pathways, sort of somewhere there. If this one thing doesn't happen, like it could actually be really, really difficult. And that's when we've used sort of technology like AI and things like that, where it could also go really wrong, even though it has the potential to go quite right. So that's where we tend to host a lot of those discussions.
Super. One last quick one.
Sure.
How many hours to take a group of students through this so that they can do it in a fairly comprehensive way?
I would say that this is probably best done if you're doing it with students, to dedicate a morning session and an afternoon session, so that you really have enough time to get the right seeds, because you can have a brainstorm and then select, and then to focus on the future wheels, and then maybe spend the afternoon in the clashing, because that's actually where a lot of the interesting nuances start to emerge. So I would say probably a morning session and an afternoon session, but I guess it's also up to the students and your own time constraints. So I'm going to hand over now to Bruce, and I'm going to share the link to the paper, which actually demonstrates the method quite fully for those who I think were asking for it in the chat. So thank you so much. It was lovely to work with all of you remotely, and I look forward to the subsequent sessions. And I see some of the presenters who are already here.
Yes.
Bruce.
Yes. Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. Yeah, so our next steps is we're going to post the video of this workshop as well as supporting materials so you can implement this process to our website. And we're also going to publish a short article. Laura's going to author a short article describing the process for a special innovations journal that's going to come out of this workshop series. And I hear interest in doing that last stage. So I think we have I think we have all of, well, we have some. If you registered through Eventbrite, we have your email. So maybe we can organize that last stage. That would be kind of fun to see if we could do a little, you know, the last stage of the process together. So look out for that invitation. And you can also send me or Ashley, as you can see in the chat, an email if you weren't directly linked. If you had the Zoom link, but you weren't linked through Eventbrite, just to stay in touch on whether we do that follow-up and they're interested in doing that. Also, we can send you links directly to your Miro platform. So if you'd like to take you know, the materials that you developed and take them to the next stage, or just use them for demonstration, we'd be happy to send you the link so you can have direct access to those Miro platforms. So please get in touch with us if you have an idea or a resource, or you'd like to be a partner to the community. I'll put the page in there. There's our partner page. So if your organization would like to be a partner, please get in touch with us and we'll put you up there with a link to your organization. And so our goal, as this is an example of, is to offer the transformations community tools and techniques that are useful for your practice in transformation. But while we also recognize there's nothing as useful as a good theory. So we're really trying to operate in that sort of news you can use space. So we'd like to do more work like this in the future virtually. Our next workshop is on the 25th of October. And I see David Manuel Navarrete is here. Maybe you can give us a brief pitch for it.
Yeah, thank you. The workshop will be focused on, I will be one of the facilitators with Hali and other people. The workshop will be focused on technologies of the self and transformation labs. Technologies of the self are operations that one can do on oneself in order to thrive or to increase the probabilities of thriving. And I see a strong connection with this notion of seeds, because the idea is that each one of us is a seed. So we will be dealing with human seeds and how to put together a set of human seeds through a collective process to develop a sort of collective agency that makes the socio-ecological system in which these different humans live thrive as well. So I look forward to we will focus on two technologies of the self, the egonets and the avatars making.
Great, thanks, David. I love the continuity, the connection between these two works. So I hope to see you all then. We'll stay in touch with you. We'll send you an invite to that workshop. And I'd like to thank Laura. Thank you so much. And thank Ashley and our discussants from Boulder's Masters of the Environment program as well. Thank you for running this program. So facilitators, if you could just stay on for a quick debrief afterwards, if you're available. And for the rest of you, thank you so much for attending and have a great week.